and from whom he received the injury that lamed him for life. How often have I heard my mother tell the story, always putting her brother's conduct in the most favourable light. He was honest, indefatigable, steady, a favourite clerk in the firm of Secretan Brothers, Manchester merchants. He fully deserved the unexpected fortune that came to him, while Philip's dissipation and extravagance were justly rewarded by disinheritance. Yet somehow, in spite of poor mamma's special pleading, my sympathy was always with this unfortunate Mr. Secretan. He saw his father's wealth pass into the possession of his father's confidential clerk. I once asked mamma what kind of man this Philip Secretan was. She told me that she had only seen him once in her life, but that he impressed her as being remarkably handsome and a perfect gentleman. And now I have seen his son, Captain Secretan. He was at Mrs. Hazelton's party last night. I had no idea who he was till afterwards. He was standing before the fireplace in the back drawing room, when I went back to my corner after singing Porgy and Moore, standing with his back to the fire, talking to old Colonel Seisman. He is tall and strong-looking, and has, to my mind, a most beautiful countenance. I never called a man beautiful before, and I dare say I shall laugh at the expression when I read over this stupid diary some day, but I cannot call his face less than beautiful. It is such a noble face, with just the grand look I could fancy in Achilles. I was reading Pope's Iliad to the children this afternoon, and I thought of Captain Secretan every time Achilles spoke. It seemed to me almost as if I could see him, standing up before me, confronting Agamemnon. He is dark, with boldly cut features, a good-humoured expression about the mouth, and a somewhat dreamy look in the dark grey eyes. I have seen handsomer faces, but none that ever interested me as deeply. He is a man I should believe in with all my soul if he were my friend, a man I should lean upon as on a rock of defence if he were of my kindred. But he is nothing to me, and I am hardly likely to see him again. Mrs. Hazelton spoke of him at luncheon today as a foolish young fellow who has sold his commission, and whose future career must be disastrous unless some distant relations were to die and leave him their property. As a rule, distant relations are not so obliging. She spoke with her reverential tone of his family, which is one of the oldest in Hampshire, although his grandfather was a Manchester merchant, and she informed me that his first cousin once removed is a baronet, Sir Douglas Secretan, with a large estate in somewhere or other. I wonder whether I shall ever see him again. December 30th. I have seen him again. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. 3 times in Mrs. Hazelton's drawing room, 3 times in the park, when I was out walking with the children, and once in Desmond Street, when I had gone out alone to post a letter. I dare say it was very wrong, and that I shall be ashamed of myself when I read over this dreadful diary, but when Captain Secretan asked me whether I ever walked in the park with the children, I said yes, and when he asked me what time, I said between 3 and 5, and after that, when he asked me if I ever went out alone, I told him yes, sometimes, just before 5:30 to post my home letter. How kind he is, how clever, how interesting, and how well we seem to know each other, though we have only met 7 times. There is evidently no association for him in the name of Faunthorpe. This is only natural, as my mother did not marry till some years after her brother's quarrel with Philip Secretan. How much I regret now that I did not learn the exact particulars of that quarrel. I have only a vague idea of the circumstances, but from what my mother told me, I know that although Philip Secretan was the sufferer, my Uncle Stephen was as vindictive as if he also had been injured. Perhaps the injurer is sometimes more angry than the injured. My mother always declared that her brother was innocent of guile or wrongdoing from first to last, but now I know Mr. Secretan's son, I feel still more inclined to side with my uncle's enemy. He, Captain Secretan, has told me the history of his life. His careless, happy youth spent abroad, with a father and mother whom he idolized. He was educated at Heidelberg, came from Heidelberg to Woolwich, to an army tutor, joined his regiment at 20, and sold out after 5 years' service a few months ago. He has now all the world before him, he says, and has only to choose a career. He is energetic and clever, and can hardly miss success in anything he may attempt. How changed our walks seem, now that there is always the chance of meeting him. As I see him coming to meet us along the wintry avenue, the familiar scene seems to grow beautiful. The sun shines brighter, the birds break out into singing. They may have been singing before, perhaps, and I too absorbed to hear them, but it seems as if they began a glad chorus at his coming. I did not think that winter afternoons could be so beautiful. The calm, still air, the blue-grey sky, the black tracery of the tall elm trees against the yellow sunset. He told me yesterday that his father would have been a rich man, but for the treachery of a friend whom he had loved and trusted. A cold, sick feeling came over me, just as if the treachery had been mine, and I had suddenly come face to face with my victim. The only lesson my father ever taught me was to revile that man's name, and to carry my hatred of him to the grave. An evil lesson for a kind-hearted man to teach, he'll say, but for all that, I don't believe there ever beat a kinder heart than my father's. I can easily believe this. Kindness and sweet temper are Captain Secretan's chief characteristics. A bright good humour which cheers one like sunshine. A way of looking at life on the pleasantest side, which would inspire hopefulness in the most dismal mind. I know how low-spirited, discontented and wretched I was growing just before I knew him, and how changed and brightened life seems to me now. The children dote upon him, and are as pleased as I am to meet him in our walks. He talks to them about all their small pleasures, and is able to interest himself in their ideas much better than I, who spend my life with them. Sometimes he paces up and down the broad walk with the 3 girls hanging about him, telling them one of the fairy tales we all know so well, and he has a way of giving a new charm and interest to the old stories, while his little touches of modern slang come in here and there with the funniest effect, and set us off laughing till the treetops seem to shake with our laughter. "How odd that we should meet you again today, Captain Secretan," cried Magdalen the day before yesterday, when we found him at the entrance of the broad walk. "Not at all odd if you insist on coming this way, little one," he said. "This is my afternoon constitutional. But if you very much object, I'll take the other side of the park." "Oh, no, no, please, come always," shouted the 3, and then they asked for Cinderella, Captain Secretan's modernised Cinderella, whose ball dress was made in New Bond Street, and whose cruel stepmother had a box on the 2nd tier at Covent Garden. It was yesterday afternoon that I met him in Desmond Street, a dreary, drizzling afternoon, which made me think the sooner the year came to an end, the better. I had been feeling rather depressed and disheartened all the morning. The children had all gone to a morning performance of the pantomime at Drury Lane, and I had the day to myself, as Mrs. Hazelton graciously informed me. I don't think leisure is an unalloyed good for those who have few pleasant thoughts to brighten their solitude. I sat mending my clothes and thinking about Captain Secretan. My thoughts were not happy ones. I was shocked to find what a hold this stranger had taken upon my mind, and how difficult it was for me to think of anyone else, or to imagine my life without him. Yet I knew that he was nothing, and never could be anything to me. Poor, but proud, and of good birth, moving in what Mrs. Hazelton calls the best society, he will naturally select a woman of fortune for his wife. He is handsome, agreeable, has many gifts which distinguish him from the common run of young men, and will have no difficulty in making an advantageous marriage. Of an obscure little pauper like me, he would never think seriously for a moment, unless his thoughts were dishonourable, and I know him and trust him well enough already to wager my life against that. What has he to do with me then, or I with him? Absolutely nothing. We are only fooling each other by this friendship, which is so sweet to me, and which must needs have some charm for him, since he takes the trouble to cultivate it. Better for both of us that we should see each other no more, or only upon the public stage of Mrs. Hazelton's drawing-room. I will tell him so, seriously and honestly, the next time we are alone together for a minute or two, while the 3 girls march on before us. This doesn't often happen, for I think Lucinda is more deeply in love with the captain than— what was I going to write? Than a girl of 12 ought to be. This is the lecture which I read myself yesterday, while I worked at that tiresome mending. All my Christmas quarter salary will go for a black silk dress, as I must have one good and fashionably made gown to wear downstairs. I wanted so much to have sent Uncle Robert a little present, and I should have liked to buy Marian a winter hat, but that is out of the question. Shall I have my dress made with flounces or a trained skirt? It was dark when I went out to post my letter, dark and wet and uncomfortable, and there was nothing farther from my thoughts than the idea of meeting Captain Secretan between Lowther Street and the post office, though I am bound to confess that the captain himself was not very far from my thoughts. I had posted my letter and was coming away from the office when a tall man, looking very big in a great rough overcoat, crossed the road and came towards me. I knew him in a moment, but a strange shy feeling came over me, and I walked on ever so fast, pretending not to know him. The street is quiet and lonely, and I heard his footsteps hurrying after me. "Do you always walk like a sporting pedestrian when you are alone, Miss Faunthorpe?" he asked, coming by my side. I started a little at the sound of his voice, although I knew so well that he was there. Yesterday was one of my nervous days, I suppose. I said something about its being such a disagreeable evening. "Yes," he answered, with his good-tempered laugh. "The old year is making himself as obnoxious as he can,